Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Off the Hook with Matty D. Today, we're going to talk about the role of DWR with our fisheries. So you have to bring in an expert, and that's exactly what I did. And this is Alex McCrickard from DWR. First of all, Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on today, Matt. Super happy to be here and to be in the studio. This is the real deal here.
This is going to be a lot of fun for sure. So let's just talk about who DWR is and what you all do kind of on a general scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. You may have previously known us as the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. And prior to that, we were the Virginia Game Commission. So we've kind of had some different name changes going on. But we are the state Fish and Wildlife Agency. In Virginia, we have regulatory jurisdiction over all inland freshwater fisheries. And all wildlife. Our sister agency, the Virginia Marine Resource Commission, VMRC, they have regulatory jurisdiction over all those marine brackish species. But we're the state Fish and Wildlife Agency. Fish and Wildlife Resources are held in a public trust, so we operate off of the North American model of wildlife conservation. And so basically, these are public trusts for the general public, and we manage those resources for the benefit of the public. So. Yeah, it's a great place to work, and there's a lot of passionate people at DWR.
And that's really the key here, because one of the things you're trying to do is to make it so that every time an angler goes out or a hunter goes out, they have the best experience possible.
Yeah, that's it. And we're really a big team, and we're a diverse team. So our traditional constituents, you just mentioned them, anglers, hunters, really though, anything related to being outdoors, wildlife viewing, paddling, hiking, you're one of our constituents. So as an agency, we're actually fairly large. There's about 450 of us, give or take, during different times of the year with part-time staff and folks coming in. And there's a wide diversity of work that we do. We're a science-based agency at heart. We manage our fish and wildlife resources off the best available science. We have a wildlife division. So we'll have biologists that study black bears, deer, turkey, endangered and threatened species of greatest conservation need, game and non-game. Then we have our fisheries division, which focuses on obviously a lot of the game fish that we have from a freshwater perspective. We do a lot of hatchery-related work, which we're going to get into later on the raising and rearing side of things. We do a lot of habitat improvement, but again, fisheries biologists that are focused on some of those game species that we manage, in addition to our non-game species, some of our native species in the state, particularly species of greatest conservation need. And then, you think about it, we have an entire law division. So, your conservation police officer, we have folks that are out there enforcing the regs, keeping the general public safe while they're out recreating. We have the nuts and bolts, planning and finance, HR, those folks that are really keeping the agency moving forward every single day, and kind of are doing a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. We have a boating safety division, which promotes safe boating and education. And we have an outreach division, which is the division that I kind of land in. So we're really do a variety of work. And my role at the agency is as aquatic education coordinator is to promote angling education and aquatic ecology education, but oftentimes find myself with 1 foot in the fisheries division and 1 foot in the outreach division. I'm kind of trying to bridge the gap between the science and management of our resources to the general public with a bit of a fishing twist on things. So we're trying to promote engagement with the resource. In the end of the day, we're trying to build conservationists and stewards of our natural resources in Virginia. And I view fishing or hunting or wildlife viewing, those are all kind of tools to get us there, right? Those are all the variety of the outlets that can get you there. We're trying to have that aha moment click where people realize, hey, the James is great. I enjoy fishing it. I want to look after it and protect it so that my kids can have that same experience. So that's what we're trying to get to. Fishing is just the gateway.
Touch of the iceberg, yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a couple of things there. You follow a science model.
Yeah.
Because really, if we don't protect these resources, they are not going to be here for our kids. And that's why some of the regulations that you all developed, let's talk about, for that matter, slot limits on striped bass.
Yeah.
It's so that the reproduction can go on. We still can have a great time catching the fish.
Yep.
But you have to release them if they're past a certain slot or even below the slot. It's really important to do that.
Yeah. So you kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts here of fisheries management or fisheries 101. We can kind of jump into that a little bit.
Yeah.
There aren't that many levers that we have when it comes to managing our fisheries. You kind of named two of the main ones,
right.
Bag limits, right? How many fish you can take
Sure.
from a given species, and then that size limit, right? What size fish can you take? And those are two levers that we can kind of pull and adjust based upon what we're seeing in our fishery to kind of hopefully get the outcome that we're looking for that'll be good for the general public and good for our anglers, but also good for the environment and good for the health of the fishery. So basically, when we assess the health of our fisheries, we do a variety of different sampling techniques. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to collect a certain number of fish from a certain area during a certain time frame. Mm-hmm. We can kind of jump into this a little bit.
Yeah.
We do gill netting, we do trap netting, and we do electrofishing. And that's something that jumps on people's radar when they see the shock boats with the anodes. And what we're really trying to do is collect a certain number of fish during a certain time frame, and then we can calculate basically a metric of relative abundance known as a catch per unit effort. And we can look at, say, how many largemouth bass did we shock on Chickahominy Lake within an hour of shocking? Mm-hmm. And then we can look at that metric and then compare it, standardize it, and compare it 1 year to the next. So we can look at, are the numbers trending up? Are they trending down? What's the diversity and the length of the population? Are we getting mostly larger individuals? Is there a good size structure? Was the spawning successful this past spring? Did we see any of those young of the year, smaller largemouth bass? So we can look at all these things that obviously end up influencing our management decisions when it comes to different water bodies. But yeah, that's absolutely it. We're out there trying to maintain the health of the fisheries and provide that recreational opportunity.
And one of the things that you also have to consider, and you do regularly, is the weather, because we just came out of a drought, and you all, correctly so, kind of said, hey, we can't go fish things like the Rappahannock right now. They're too dry. It's way too warm, and that really hurts the brook trout population. And those very smaller, what I call fragile fish, fun to catch for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But you don't want to destroy that population.
Yeah, and we educate a lot on that, Matt. We try to let folks know, hey, water temps and air temps do have an impact on some of these cold water species like native brook trout. We've done some outreach on catch and release best practices, and we try to let the general public, know the background. Striped bass is the same deal. If you catch striped bass in warm water temps in the spring, when those water temps are getting above 70 degrees Fahrenheit and you're in complete freshwater, you can lead to more catch and release mortality, or studies have shown that bumps up.
Right.
So just letting the general public know and trying to get that education out there. So that people can make those informed decisions. Hey, if I'm going to fish for trout, maybe I'll do it in the first couple hours of sunlight and then maybe switch to go fish for largemouth bass because we're in the middle of July. Or, hey, I know that the freestone streams might be getting a touch too warm. Really once you get in the upper 60s, it gets pretty stressful for native brook trout. Maybe I'll consider fishing a tailwater like the Jackson or the Smith, which provides stable, cold temperatures year-round and great trout fishing.
Yep.
So there's opportunities, there's ways to get around it. We just try to educate on that. But
for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up.
One of the things you also mentioned when we started is you control the inland waters.
Yeah.
So that does include the tidal fisheries, though, like the James, like the Chickahominy.
That's correct.
But it doesn't include the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So tidal freshwater fish, those are under our jurisdiction. So if you're in the tidal James or the tidal Rappahannock and you're catching bowfin or largemouth bass or chain pickerel, those are all species that we manage. Blue catfish, channel catfish, flathead catfish. Once you get into the anadromous species, I just used a big word there.
You did.
Those fish that live out in that saltwater environment and come into freshwater to spawn. So people instantly think, oh, salmon. We don't have salmon like you were catching in Alaska on your recent trip. We don't have salmon in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, but we're blessed with some pretty cool species like striped bass, American shad, hickory shad, blueback herring and alewife. These are all species that are managed by the Virginia Marine Resource Commission, and a lot of times in collaboration with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. When you have migratory fish like striped bass that spans from Maine all the way down to the
Carolinas and beyond.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got multiple states, tons of different jurisdictions. There's a lot that's going on there, but those species are regulated by VMRC, the Virginia Marine Resource Commission,
Gotcha.
in the state of Virginia. So if you're catching striped bass in downtown Richmond in late April, you're in fresh water, but those are fish that are actually managed by VMRC, and we work hand in hand with the Marine Resource Commission.
Of course, because if you didn't, it would be an absolute disaster.
Exactly. We have, from a management perspective, we work hand in hand with them, and then our officers are working hand in hand. We have folks down in the Tidewater area that some of our officers are out in boats enforcing VMRC regs on, say, species like redfish and speckled trout. And sometimes the VMRC folks are up in freshwater enforcing some of the freshwater regs. So there's a little bit of overlap there.
Sure, for sure. I'm going to bring up some of the pictures that you have given us here.
Yeah.
I mean, right away, I start with this because to me, this just says Virginia. Gorgeous brook trout, and you're having some fun, and handled carefully too.
Yeah.
Keeping it in the water once you've caught it, rather than bring it out and having the picture 7 feet above and that kind of a thing, and risk dropping it and that sort of thing.
Yeah, keeping the fish in the water is great. People always ask me, and I always try to say, hey, think about how long you could hold your breath underwater, and that's kind of hold them up for a quick pick. I'm all for a grip and grin. You've caught that fish, you're excited about it. Hold it up for a quick pick. Always wet your hands. Fish have a protective slime coating that acts as their immune system.
Yep.
So, and that's one little tidbit. People don't realize that if you grab a fish with dry hands, you could take that slime coating off and then make that fish more susceptible to a variety of different
diseases.
Bacterial infections, pathogens, parasites. Our waterways are a big vector of all sorts of different things that basically a fish's biggest defense mechanism is don't let anything in. So again, handling fish with wet hands, letting them swim out of your hands when they're ready. Beautiful shot of the Upper Jackson there.
Yeah, and again, this is an entire waterway that you control, that you make sure that it's done right.
Yep.
You do stock the Jackson.
Yep.
And talk a little bit about, we're going to get into stocking in a bit.
Yeah.
But it's a really big portion of keeping our fishery alive.
Oh, absolutely. It provides great recreational opportunities. This is the Upper Jackson here above Lake Moomaw, and we do stock some fish in there. There's wild fish as well in that Hidden Valley section. This is the headwaters of the James. Beautiful area if you've never been out to this part of the state. It's just fantastic. Hey, there we are. There's downtown Richmond. One of my guilty. That's my favorite fish to catch, the striped bass. We get a lot of fish like that in that 19, 20-inch range downtown in the spring. We call them schoolies.
So fun.
Oh, they're so much fun to catch. And look, I'm right underneath I-95. It's people have been fishing for striped bass here since the turn of time.
That to me still blows me away because we're looking at a fish like that just tugs, and you're like, it should be out in the Chesapeake Bay, and it's literally under our nose. It is incredible.
Oh, the opportunities are really cool.
Getting kids into fishing is really important too. What's the adage? Give a person a fish, they feed for a day. Teach a kid to fish, they can feed for a lifetime if you keep.
That's it. And we do a lot of that from an outreach perspective. We're trying to ignite that spark. We do lots of fishing workshops across the state. One of our big weekends every year is free fishing days.
Yep.
It's always the first full weekend in June, where I always say, hey, it's like test driving a car. You're not required to buy it. And it's a chance to get out and fish without having to buy a license. And we do events across the state where we have staff, rods, reels, tackle, bait, and we're actually getting people out fishing for free, and they're great chances to introduce families and kids. But that's it, getting people out there and excited. And when you see someone catch that first fish, it's a lot of fun.
The smile right there, it says it all. First he's got the beautiful Sunny, and then he goes into the is that a chain cat or
that actually looks to me it actually looks like a small channel cat. I'd have to look at the anal fin though.
For sure.
Underneath his left hand, it's the rounded margin as a channel cat. That's actually shout out. That's Toby Kirk.
Okay.
Two of our colleagues John and Molly, that's their son, and he's actually become quite a great angler over the years. He's not so little anymore. He's growing fast, and he's catching all sorts of different species, usually out fishing his dad. So.
But that's the thing. I mean, well, that's what you want. You want him to grow up and love the sport. And,
That's it.
You know,
Yeah.
what I love about it, I mean, catching fish is one thing,
Yeah.
but just being outside in the solitude and the environment, that I think speaks volumes.
It's the place fishing takes us,
Yeah.
and the time spent with friends and family, or time spent by yourself, just whatever was in your head.
Just unplug.
Yeah, because you're so focused on what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really unplug.
For sure. 2 kids here fishing. As you mentioned, families. They come to your events.
Yep.
Maybe mom, dad, sister, brother have never fished before. It's a chance for them to do that on those free fishing days. And it's sometimes fishing can be costly, but you can make it so that it's not. And that makes it kind
that's
of fun.
it. It can just be a small little piece of your day. It doesn't need to be, we get so busy with life. I've got 2 little kids now, and my little windows to fish are like, okay, I'm going to sneak out at 5:30 and I'm going to be back by 7 kind of deal, and that's great. Living in Richmond, I can do that. I can run down to the river. We've got this great resource right here in our backyard. But a lot of times with families, we promote it, hey, go to some of these parks. They've got playgrounds adjacent to the ponds and lakes, and there's farmers markets going on. A place like Dory Park, you can get a quick little 15-minute window, 20-minute window of fishing in, and then move to the next activity.
It is kind of nice there.
Yeah.
Again, just great more pictures of people fishing, it doesn't make a difference on the size. It's just fly fishing.
Beautiful fly fishing.
I mean,
we both have an affinity there. Yeah.
Great water for fly fishing here, and I've probably hit less than 2% of it. That's my biggest thing. You know,
and that one of the things too, Matt, that you brought up. So much water. We've got so much diversity in the state. I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find another state with this kind of diversity. And living in Central Virginia, living in Richmond. I feel like we've got everything right at our doorstep.
Within an hour and a half drive.
Hour and a half, go east. I can put a john boat or a kayak in on a calm day at one of our wildlife management areas on the Chesapeake Bay and be fishing for puppy drum, speckled trout, striped bass, bluefish. The very next day, I could say, I really want to go catch some native brook trout.
Right.
Hour and 45 minutes the other direction, I could be on one of our wildlife management areas up on the edge of Shenandoah National Park catching native brook trout that have been here since the last ice age on small dry flies and everything in between. It's so much diversity. That's actually a shot from our Rapid Inn wildlife management area where we were doing a course, kids camp in collaboration with Trout Unlimited. That was a great workshop we did, getting folks out.
So you do work with different organizations like Trout Unlimited, like Virginia Fly Fishers, to understand what their needs are, but also to teach, again, conservation, education, some of the simple things maybe.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely it. And we can't do it ourselves. We're working with tons of different partners, and there's so many groups out there that are introducing people to fishing. So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Working with partners is the main way to get things done. We work a lot with state parks and county parks and rec offices too. So lots of great chances to get out there and fish.
It's just so much fun. And you said a little john boat, and you could do a lot. Just motor some of our Great Lakes, or or even some of the bigger waters.
Oh yeah, there's just so many opportunities. It's hard to know where you could blindfold yourself and just point on a map and find a spot to go to that would be new. You could spend a lifetime. I mean, it's there's so much in Virginia.
It is fantastic.
And then kayak fishing too. I mean, you get to places. If you get a kayak, you can get to places that the bigger boats can't get to. And there's just, it's like with fishing. There's so many little niches. You get into one thing, and I like to. If I can catch a fish on a fly, that's how I prefer to do it. I'm no purist by any means.
Sure.
I like fishing with spinning rod. I like fishing with with bait. I like saltwater, freshwater, and it's just so much variety out there.
I know people who I fish with locally, they'll go put their little kayak in on South Anna and drift down. And I'm like, I wish that's just a dream for sure. So, but it does make it fun. And then, as you said, you have a bigger boat. You can go Chickahominy. There's so many great waterways. As you know, I was out. MLF was here a couple of weeks ago.
That's right.
We were on
Tuttle
the Chickahominy.
James.
Wow, was that incredible.
Yeah, I mean, we've got literally world-renowned largemouth bass fisheries where we've got folks that big national tournaments.
I mean, to your credit, to your guys' credit, DWR, when I talk to those anglers, they said, we want to come back here again because it was such a different fishery than going, and I'm not going to put this down, but going to, a reservoir in Louisiana where it just stays the same. They had to adjust for the tide. They had to look at the different foliage. They had to really figure out where the structures were. They loved it because it was more challenging than just a flat lake.
Those tidal fisheries are really dynamic. And they're challenging. Largemouth bass is not something that I'm an expert in by any means. I catch some, but bass fishing is an art, and tournament bass fishing is.
You've got to know your game.
You've got to be on your game, and know what you're doing, and have your game plan. And it's pretty cool that we've got fisheries that are up there with some of the best in the country. And provide these awesome opportunities to kind of get out. And so, a lot of diversity to your fishing experience. It could be a casual hour by yourself. Matt just needs to get out and make a couple casts, or we've got folks that are pursuing it professionally, and everything in between.
And like you said, not just fishing, because I know we're focusing on that because it is off the hook with Matty D, but just getting outside and enjoying our great waterways, just kayaking in beautiful ponds like this. This next shot, that just takes your breath away right there.
Yeah, that's just, I think that might be.
Is that Smith Mountain Lake area?
I think it might be Smith Mountain, or that actually, it's possible that's Lake Moomaw.
Okay.
Megan Marchetti, one of our professional photographers at the agency. Shout out to her. These are all of her photos that she pulled together for this, which is great.
This is great.
I'll have to ask her. That might be Moomaw. It might be Smith Mountain. It kind of looks like Smith Mountain, but so many great
waterways. And then again, more kids fishing here. So I'm just going to run through smallmouth, largemouth. You mentioned before bowfin, rainbow fishery, browns, brookies. Oh man, and again, getting kids into it. All right, so we have to start somewhere. We do have some native fish here, but you guys also are responsible for stocking our streams and rivers and making fishing even better, trying to get that species to grow more and more.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and that's it. We've got a pretty robust cultural program. We've got 9 different facilities across the state. 5 of them are focused on warm water species. Think about species like striped bass, species like walleye. You say species like walleye, and people don't realize walleye, and they're immediately thinking about northern Wisconsin, Great Lakes. They live and breathe walleye out there. We have some really cool walleye fisheries in Virginia, and
I didn't even know that.
Some of them are within our backyard here, like Lake Chesden. Right out here, Chesterfield.
Has walleye.
Dinwiddie County line is one of the best places to fish for walleye in and around Richmond, which is really, really cool. So there's some pretty neat opportunities, and those wouldn't be available without stocking, which is pretty cool. We do have native walleye in the New River in far southwest Virginia, which is pretty cool. So there is a native population there. But a lot of our lakes in the area, those fisheries are solely sustained through our warm water programs. So they do species like striped bass, walleye, bluegill, red ear sunfish, largemouth bass, species like that. When we stock channel catfish, we can't grow them to the size we want to quick enough here with the climate in Virginia. So we oftentimes actually get those from a separate vendor, and we'll stock those around the state. Channel catfish provide a great recreational opportunity. We love channel catfish. And then from a cold water perspective, we've got 4 hatcheries that are solely dedicated to hatching, raising, and rearing cold water species, which is trout basically, browns, brooks, rainbows, and some tigers. So there's some really cool opportunities. I think that's a shot of our Withville hatchery there, looking at the
and the bins are filled with eggs, is that
that are
correct?
incubating,
and here's somebody curating eggs?
Yep, our hatchery staff are dedicated. They're working long hours. They're oftentimes, when they're in their peak season, sometimes there's people there around the clock. And they're working so hard, and they're oftentimes behind the scenes. So those folks don't get enough credit, and I want to give them a shout out. So credit deserved where credit's due. They work really, really hard.
And there's a major science behind this too. It's not like you just kind of mix the sperm and the egg. I mean,
Yeah.
it's water temperatures, it's the pH. There's a lot that has to go right to get a good, successful hatch to get small fingerlings.
That's it. And some years are we get varied results. Annually, we usually stock, from a trout perspective, about 1 million catchable sized fish annually, sometimes a little more across the state. And when it comes to our warm water facilities, we usually stock between like 3 and 5 million fish across the state annually. But yeah, there's a lot that's got to go right. Even in a controlled environment, there's a lot that's got to go right to have a successful spawn. And some of these species are tricky. We've just started doing some aquaculture with smallmouth bass at our Front Royal Fish Cultural Station, one of our warm water stations up there. Smallmouth bass are notoriously challenging from an aquaculture perspective, and we've been actually having some great success so far. So that's pretty exciting stuff going on there as well. But all from rainbow trout and brown trout to walleye and striped bass and all sorts of different opportunities. It's pretty cool. But our hatchery facilities are neat. You can visit them too, if the general public can visit them. And that's a great way to spend a morning or an afternoon with the families, to go check out the hatchery. It's pretty cool.
It's totally different. I've been to some hatcheries in upstate New York where I was working before, and the work that's done is incredible. So the idea is for you all to do this, to breed fish and then to have them begin to naturally reproduce. Of course, there is part of it that it's a put and take fishery, right? I mean, you do get anglers that take, and so you want to put it there for them. But what is the natural reproduction on the whole here in Virginia? Is it pretty good?
Yeah. So, and that question is kind of hard to answer as a whole. Sure. It varies by species.
Right.
So take smallmouth bass as an example. We know that through our science has showed us that really high water in the springtime, smallmouth bass are a benthic spawning fish. They spawn down on the bottom like trout. They build that oval-shaped depression. Female will lay her eggs. The male will fertilize the eggs. And then basically that occurs in the month of May. And if you've got high water on the James River or the Rappahannock River right smack in the middle of spring, which, as you know, more than anyone, these with our pattern, the weather patterns we've had in the springtime, where we have these really large rain events that go across the whole state, and the river, say, bumps from 6,000 cubic feet per second to 60,000 cubic feet per second.
It's a flush.
It's a flush. So those eggs are either getting washed out. If you've got fresh hatched fry, they're getting pushed around. So high water in the springtime leads to poor spawning success for smallmouth bass.
Right.
And we've seen a bit of a decline in our smallmouth bass numbers on some of our rivers like the James.
So is that why there's that push to get smallmouth bass done in your hatcheries? I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, exactly. So with doing some aquaculture at Front Royal, we can try to combat that where we can.
Gotcha.
Obviously, we're limited on allocations with how much we can produce, but that's exactly kind of the thought process, is to try to find ways to try to remedy where we can. Obviously, Front Royal can't solve the entire state smallmouth issues on its own, but also having more stable conditions in the spring, where we get those strong year classes that can keep that population moving through. You might be able to deal with 1 or 2 missing year classes, but when you've got 3 or 4 or 5 missing year classes in a row, you'll notice it when you're out fishing. You're like, you
can't find the fish.
I did this float 5 years ago, and I caught like 30 fish, and I've caught like 2 or 3. You know what I mean? So it can be challenging. And recruitment's just one small component for smallmouth bass. There's a lot of other stuff going on too. Some that we understand, some that we don't, and we're still learning. But that's an example where we try to come in and do some remedial stocking. Species like striped bass in Lake Anna, they'll go through the spawning motions as an example. That's one of our larger impoundments that we stock with striped bass, and probably one of the better inland striped bass fisheries between Richmond and really Washington, D.C. area. And that's a great day trip. It's really good in the wintertime, like late fall, winter. Okay. You could leave Richmond in the morning. It's an easy day trip. And just like out on the bay, you can be riding around in late December looking for birds, diving, and you'll see fish coming up, busting on shad on the top.
Really?
And you can have that sort of Chesapeake Bay experience with striped bass inland. And now that's solely sustained through our stocking. They don't successfully reproduce naturally in Lake Anna. But that's an example where we stock to provide that opportunity. Walleye are kind of the same way. It's hard for them to find successful reproduction. They'll kind of go through the spawning motions. We do have a walleye in Lake Chesson that'll run up that way, and then also some of them spill over Brassfield Dam down in the lower Appomattox River, and we will get a pulse of walleye pushing up towards Brassfield Dam in the spring as well. They'll kind of go through the spawning motions, but they won't successfully spawn. But yeah, where we can, we try to remediate with stocking, and then also for like stocking trout, there's a lot of different protocols that we have. If we're stocking a stream, a lower portion of a stream, and we know that the upper portion of that stream has native brook trout, native wild brook trout, we ensure that those fish are triploid, sterile fish that basically can't reproduce, so we're not impacting the genetics of those native streams. Especially if we're stocking larger brook trout in the lower portions of those streams. And there are a few places that occurs where there's like a potentially delayed harvest section that caters to, you know, a lot of the folks that like to catch fish and take them home. But at the same time, we're trying to sort of like tread this line where we're trying to manage the fishery with the best interests of the public and also the best interests of the resource.
For sure.
So, yeah.
So, as you said in the beginning, a lot of science going down. Now, let's get into some of the other science here. You're putting the fish in, but then, as you said, you need to start figuring out what is in the rivers, how is the stocking working, or what's surviving in the waters. Is something changing? And you do that by, as you said, a couple of different ways, netting or electroshock. Netting, let's talk about that first.
Yeah, so we gill net a lot of our large impoundments in the late fall time frame. It's hard work and it's a long, cold day. We'll do it in like early December. Folks will be out on like we were just talking about Lake Anna. We'll be setting gill nets, and it's 3 or 4 long days in a row where we work from the upper part of the lake down, and you'll set like 10 or 12 nets. We'll leave them out for 24 hours. We'll run them off the bank all the way down into about 20 feet of water, and basically anything that swims through that net is going to get caught in that net during that time frame. Now, we do have some mortality that occurs, but what we'll do with those fish is we'll identify them. We'll get lengths and weights on all of them. Fish that are alive, we release. Fish that swim into the nets earlier, obviously, might succumb to mortality. Those fish we're pulling otoliths on, which is the ear bone. And just like you can count the rings on a tree to look at how old a tree is, you can count the rings on an otolith to look at how old a certain fish is. So we can kind of look at, hey, what percentage of the population is in this size frame or is 4 years old, and we know that those fish from the wildlife stocking and 4 years ago are doing really well because we've got a lot in that kind of age frame. So we do have some mortality, but we're getting a very, very small percentage of what's actually in the lake, so it's not going to hurt overall numbers. But it's all going to science. That's gill netting that occurs a lot of times late in the fall. We do a lot of electrofishing, and I think you had a shot of the shock boat up there earlier. Basically, we have a generator on the boat, and we can basically set our, we can look at the water temperature, the conductivity of the water, and we can basically set the voltage, the amps, the frequency based on that. We'll send an electrical current that'll go out, and if you actually look behind, there's a that
triangle
boom there, that's kind of hanging down. There might be another shot too where they're netting potentially, but basically we'll send that electrical current will go out through that boom, and then basically down those dangly anodes there, and we're actually sending an electrical current out into the water. That'll go about, depending on the voltage, that'll go about 8 to 10 feet around those anodes, and then about 8 to 10 feet down. So if we're shocking in 20 feet of water, we're not going to get everything that's there. We're only going to get what's suspended in that electrical field. As the fish swim through the field, or if we drive around and we're shocking and then we hit a school of fish, basically what happens is their muscles will contract. They'll come to the surface where we can get our nets on them. We have large live wells with dissolved oxygen getting pumped in. We keep the fish healthy. They just get temporarily stunned. then we can get them in, and we can look at get measurements on all the fish. We can identify them. We can look at length, weights. Can tell us how healthy the population is, how much of a specific species is represented through the population. We can look at the diversity. We can look at potential. Sometimes we're shocking, and we'll get a species of fish that we didn't stock in a certain lake, and we have people moving fish around that we try to discourage that. So that's something that we're always looking for. As an example, we had I'm trying to remember the lake. It's in the Swift Creek Reservoir watershed, and it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. One of our biologists was out doing routine spring sampling, shocked up a northern snakehead. And we were like, hey, this is an invasive fish that we don't want spreading around the state. They have not been documented in the James River watershed until this exact moment. Someone moved them around. I'm mind blanking on the name of the lake right now. I'll blurt it out loud like an hour from now. But then we went out, and with a rapid response protocol that we have, we went out with 3 or 4 shock boats the next day and tried to find as many as we could to get out, and we were able to collect a handful more. So if you can catch it early enough, a rapid response protocol can be really good to try to remove those species that we're concerned about, that we don't want spreading around.
You mentioned the instrument, and there's the larger shot of it. I'm going to bring this up full. So off of the pole there, that's the
electrical currents coming down through that anode. You can see that this is that's John Odenkirk, one of our biologists that's been with the agency for a long, long time, and happens to be our northern snakehead expert. He's up there. You can see he's leaning up against that railing. That railing's preventing him from going into the water, and gives him a stable platform to net those fish, and then we're getting them right in the live well. When you're up there netting and you go through a pot of fish, it's pretty wild. You can't net them all sometimes. So you're moving around. It's a lot of work. But it's a great way to get out. And I'll tell you, shocking is humbling. It's very humbling. You'll go through, like even some of the stuff downtown where I've gotten out and I've spent a day or two on the shock boat downtown. You're like, man, I am just not that good at fishing. It's just one thing that I've learned.
Because all the fish come up and you're like, wow,
One thing I've learned about working at DWR is that you are around fish all the time. There are fish. I mean, it's wild.
And you just don't realize.
It's like,
your fly or your lure or whatever is that big, and you're fishing in, huge water. So for sure. And I think it's important to once again state, when you use this electroshock, it is not killing the fish. It's just a minor paralysis to be able to do that count, and then you get them right back in their water. I mean, and they're living once again without an issue.
Yep, that's it. We do have some small percentage where we have a little bit of mortality that can occur, but it's usually less than 2-3% of the fish that we interact with. When we're out shocking and sampling a lake in a given day, we'll interact with hundreds of fish. So not to say that mortality can't occur, but it's pretty low likelihood. We handle the fish with care. Like I said, it allows us to sort of get a good understanding of the population. There's our northern snakehead there. They're well established now, firmly established in the Potomac and Rappahannock drainages. So far, the research that's out there, fortunately, has showed that they have not displaced the largemouth bass population on those tidal rivers. And we haven't seen any negative impacts on these big tidal productive systems like the Potomac. But that's not to say that northern snakehead might not have impacts in other systems, particularly smaller, more fragile systems that might have species of greatest conservation need or endangered and threatened species. So we're trying to prevent the spread of this fish. But that's John Odenkirk there. He knows more about northern snakehead than just about anyone in the country, just given he was based in Northern Virginia when they were first introduced and on the scene, and he's kind of been studying them ever since. So
were they introduced for a specific reason, or they just kind of?
It's actually not entirely. We're not entirely sure about that. There's a few different theories that are out there, but they were originally put in, I think, to a pond. I think it was called Crofton Pond. Which went into a tributary that then dumped into the
spilled
into the Potomac, and then once and this is kind of the deal we tell people. Once that genie's out of the bottle, we can't get it back in. So and we're seeing the same thing with Alabama bass right now, which is a black bass species that outcompetes largemouth and can actually hybridize with smallmouth to the point where they swamp the genetics of the smallmouth. And if you love smallmouth bass, Alabama bass are like the biggest scare right now. I mean, they're they're a big threat to a lot of our fisheries. And again, once that genie's out of the bottle, we can't put it back in. So really, the biggest piece of advice that we tell folks is just don't move fish around. And a lot of folks think they're improving the fishing in a given area. Hey, I catch these fish in my home state of whatever, and
I'm going to bring them. Yeah,
I'm going to bring them here, and it typically leads to negative impacts. We don't know before it's too late.
Sure.
And we can't get that back. As a general rule of thumb, one thing we've learned about fisheries management over the last 40 to 50 years is it's generally not a good idea to bring in a novel predator into a system that can disrupt cause a lot of problems.
And there's that snakehead again. Back in the day,
blue catfish.
Blue
there you have
catfish
another
is one of the ones that was brought up here for sport and game.
We introduced those.
And it has exploded in the population.
So our agency introduced blue catfish back in the 1970s, right around the same population that actually Atlantic striped bass populations were declining. We introduced them to create a sport fishery. And if you look at it, we were successful at doing that.
For sure.
We've also are very concerned about some of the issues that this invasive fish is causing. Hindsight 2020, not a good idea, right? We did this like 50-some years ago. We would not be stocking blue catfish in 2024, right? But that's a great example. Blue catfish population have expanded to the point where they've stunted themselves on a lot of our tidal tributaries. We're concerned about their impacts on species like American shad, blueback herring, alewife.
They just eat everything.
Yeah, they're basically a prime opportunistic omnivore, although they get more and more piscivorous, which means that they solely eat fish. They get more and more piscivorous the larger they get.
Right.
But basically, they're going to eat what's around them. They're going to eat white perch. If white perch are around them, they're going to eat detritus, which is decaying organic matter. They can actually eat decaying organic matter along the bottom. They're going to eat snails, mussels, silverside minnows, whatever's around them, they're going to eat. And as we get these pulses of anadromous fish in the spring, they're going to obviously prey on whatever's around them. So how can we keep our blue catfish numbers in check so that we're mitigating against negative impacts on native and naturalized fishes, while at the same time enjoying them for the fishery they are? I mean, it's pretty amazing. Triple-digit fish get caught in the James almost every year.
It's incredible.
100+ pound fish getting caught.
These are ginormous.
What else in tidal fresh water can grow to be that big? It's I've never caught any of the really big ones. I've had some good-sized, like 30 to 32-inch fish,
which is a ginormous fish.
I've had them eat the clouser downtown while you're fishing for stripers. It's like strip, thump, and you're like, oh, I'm on a log, and then the log starts
to move,
and you're like, my 7-weight's undermatched. It's not
happening, right? Exactly.
So I have gotten a few nice-sized catfish in downtown as bycatch, but I can't imagine tugging on one of those 60, 70, 80 pounders. But I mean, it's a huge fishery. We've got folks coming from all over the country to experience it. There's a whole network of guides that guide there.
And that's what I was going to say. In fact, when I started this program, I met a guy down at, not in Caro's, Henrico, where the MLF was. Osborne, yeah. And he was coming off of guiding, and and they caught a huge bunch of blue and loved it. And that's great because that's what it's about.
Oh, it's a great opportunity to get out, enjoy the fishery. We advocate for folks and we encourage folks to take the small fish home. We want to mitigate against those negative impacts. The small fish are really good eating. I think that's a perfect eater size right there. One thing that I like to do is right when I get them in, I like to bleed them and try to fillet them as quickly as I can. They're so good. If you just lightly batter them, fish tacos. Do it all day long. They're really good. I know catfish sometimes turn people off a little bit, but if you like eating fish and chips, or you like a fried catfish taco,
catfish is fantastic.
Oh, it's fantastic. And these small fish are they're ubiquitous on our tidal rivers. So
Right.
we're advocating for folks to take them home. There's no bag limits on them. You can take as many of them as you want from a bag limit perspective. And yeah, they're a great recreational opportunity. They're a great way to introduce people to fishing. It's not super complex. If you've never fished before, you fish a piece of bait on the bottom of the James River, you're going to catch a blue catfish. It might not be a giant one, but you're going to catch one. So they're a lot of fun to catch, and they're a great way to introduce people to the sport of fishing. But yes, we are advocating for folks to take those home. But that's another example of
they were
genie out of the
introduced
bottle.
to-
We can't get it back.
Get it
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
But if you can slowly slow the growth down a little bit,
Yep.
yeah, for sure.
Yep. If we can keep their population in check by promoting that. There's also, we could do an entire show on just blue catfish, Matt. There's so much there.
We absolutely will. Yeah.
There's a lot there, but there's a large commercial fishery there. There's an electrofishing operation from a commercial fishery perspective. The commercial fishery is actually managed by the VMRC.
Yep.
We manage the rec fishery, but there's a lot. There's a lot there with blue catfish. It's a hot topic right now, and it just so happens that they taste pretty good.
A couple of years ago, I was out with VCU
Yeah.
Marine, and we did shocking, and I did a whole set of stories
Yeah,
on
Dr.
that.
Garmin on all those.
and
Yeah.
it was very interesting, because that was the first time I was really experienced to the.
It's
to the whole-
unbelievable when you go down and you do the low frequency electrofishing solely targets catfish,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. So we'll set it to low frequency, and it's
you get hundreds that
it's
come
amazing.
up.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
The biomass that's there.
Right.
So
Very, very big. Fish right here is a.
beautiful smallmouth bass.
Yeah.
Gorgeous smallmouth bass, and I think that was
That's a big smallmouth bass.
That's a really nice smallmouth. Look at the markings on that fish.
Yeah.
Beautiful fish. I think that was down on the North Fork of the Holston. Megan was down there. I was talking about Megan taking photos. She was down there earlier this year down in Southwest Virginia. Just gorgeous fish. But yeah, you get something like that to eat a top water,
fly or popper or whatever.
I was walking in the parking lot, Matt, and the cicadas are just singing,
Chirping.
and it's hot, and my mind instantly went to this kind of stuff, like
Right.
low water, clear. You can float these rivers, and with a lot of people that haven't fly fished for smallmouth, I highly recommend it. Anglers that like fly fishing for trout,
Yep.
you'll find it a lot of fun because you can float down the banks and just splat these big, gaudy foam cicada patterns, or just popping bugs and splat them down.
Yeah.
And oftentimes if you float by and there's a sycamore tree or something hanging over, the smallmouth, they know what the cicadas are, and they're looking for them.
Yeah.
Japanese beetles too. I've had windy days where beetles are getting blown out of sycamore trees, and then you're fishing for smallmouth and you're using trout tactics. Long light leaders,
you're just-
little
yeah.
beetle patterns, and you've got 17, 18-inch smallmouth
Just coming up and
just dimpling like brown trout.
it's so weird.
Or you can fish for them like you can fish for largemouth bass. Burn a buzz bait over the surface and they'll blow up on it. So the diversity smallmouth bass offer is pretty cool.
And then carp fishing. People
Common carp.
overlook this because
Yep.
it's an
Oh, it's a great
fishery.
Oh, it's a
Yeah.
great opportunity. Again, one of those fish we don't want people moving around.
Right.
But where they are, they provide a great recreational opportunity. Really hard fighting fish. There's one of our native sucker there.
I'll go
Pretty
back to
cool.
the carp too.
Yeah, the common carp are they get really big. They're really finicky on a fly rod. That people have called them the freshwater bonefish. Bonefish, think about like the Bahamas,
Yep.
Caribbean, super finicky, tailing. People that fly fish for carp, they'll get up on these flats and they're super spooky. And you've got to lay the fly out in front of them and light strips, and they'll eat like damselfly nymphs and dragonfly nymphs and small woolly buggers, things like that. But you hook them, and it's like straight
game
back
on,
and
yeah.
90 feet of fly line gone. And it's an overlooked fish.
Yeah.
They're a fish that, you can see. I was down at Browns Island with my children the other weekend walking around. I saw two big carp in the canal right there. And I was like, I need to come down here after work next week
and throw a fly and see
and
what
get
I can
it.
do.
Yeah, and that's right. Literally downtown.
5 minutes.
There's
Right.
opportunities that people don't realize that are
makes
there.
Makes it kind of fun. And then back to the sucker. They're loaded in all of our streams.
Yeah,
Yeah.
variety of different species, from red horse suckers to white suckers. There's northern hog suckers. There's a variety of different native species that all serve their own individual niche. These fish, unfortunately, get nicknamed rough fish, or I've even heard trash fish used to describe
Yep.
some of these native species. That couldn't be farther from the truth. They're really cool, and they serve their own niche within that community. Yeah, these sucker species are almost like they're like the cows of our rivers. They're just grazing on the periphyton algae down along the bottom.
Right.
And again, they're just important for that nutrients moving through the food web. Pretty neat, but really cool. And sometimes they'll eat a nymph. It's very rare, but I've had it happen before. It's pretty neat when you catch a sucker on a nymph. It's something different.
Yeah,
So.
unfortunately, I've had that experience one too often, going for rainbows that I'm, using something small, all of a sudden, oh no, that's not the species I wanted.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but it's cool from a native species diversity. But yeah, not the big rainbow you were hoping for.
It is what it is.
Yeah, that happens.
At least it gives you a little laugh and a lot of fun there. For
There's
sure.
a northern hog sucker, so that's a really cool native species. See
What
that
cool
big
look.
boxy head?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got that big boxy head and those really cool saddle blotching marks on from the dorsal, the back of their fish, to the ventral side, the underside. You see those black saddle bars. They're really cool though, and one of the cool things that this is kind of leading me to, snorkeling. We talk about wildlife viewing, and we think about birds and elk and bear and bobcats and that kind of stuff. Some of the freshwater snorkeling
It's pretty cool.
Really, really cool. You can put a mask on and get out, even in a small, say, hey, it doesn't need to be like the James River or the Potomac River. You can get out and small little tributary. You mentioned the South Anna River.
Right.
Get out in a riffle, and if you're in that area, there's some amazing diversity in far southwest Virginia, and you can see species like on the Clinch drainage. You can see species of darters that, quite frankly, look like they belong on a tropical Hawaiian reef. There's these tangerine darters that are brilliant orange and yellow. Just so cool to see all the diversity that's out there. But yeah, doing the freshwater snorkeling is a really fun way to.
Never even thought about that or knew about that.
And it's a great way to beat the heat in summer months.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Even though the
Yeah.
water in like the James is super warm.
You see all sorts of stuff, but yeah, it's pretty neat. It's starting to gain popularity, but it's pretty cool to see these fish interacting in their environment.
It really is.
Another big smallmouth bass from Southwest Virginia.
Those are fantastic fish for sure.
It's so much fun,
Yeah.
and that they're ubiquitous. We've got smallmouth all over the state, and we were talking about them earlier. A lot of our smallmouth fisheries, thinking larger rivers, right? These bigger Piedmont rivers.
Right.
We do have some lake fisheries, like South Holston Lake has them down in far Southwest Virginia. Lake Mumaw's got them up at the headwaters of the James, but a lot of them are river fisheries, and you can have a ball with a buddy in a canoe, or even just wet wading this time of the year. Grab a pair of Tevas or Chacos, old pair of tennis shoes.
That's exactly. You just got to be careful.
You got to be careful. You got to look at the river flows,
Right.
And you got to remember, hey, the river looks. If it rained up in Lynchburg,
It's coming
and you're
down.
fishing in Richmond, so you got to look at projections.
Yep.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, has that really good
The whole-
forecast
yep, yeah.
for a lot of our tidal rivers, including the James in downtown Richmond. So you can look at, hey, when it's projected to bump up,
Yep.
and that's important. But yeah, you got to be careful. Always let someone know where you're going, but once you start wading these smallmouth rivers, it's like,
It's fun.
You can explore for days.
For sure. And just a couple of more quick pictures.
Oh yeah, there's a native.
This is the new thing too. Panfish on the fly. A lot of people doing that.
So much fun.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. So this is a worthy adversary of the fly rod. This is a redbreast sunfish. They're a native fish to Virginia. They're a native fish to the James River and a lot of our rivers in the state. They are so much fun. You'll catch them when you're fishing for the smallmouth. They're beautiful. They've got these red-orange bellies, hence the name redbreast. They've got these cool blue, almost turquoise-colored streaks underneath their eye. That's a really big one too. The fish is right around 9 inches. But they'll eat a little nymph. They'll eat a little popping bug. They'll eat a woolly bugger, and they provide they're a blast on lightweight fly rod.
That's so awesome.
Great way to break up your float. Yeah, that's a big one too. That's a really nice-sized one.
Very, very pretty.
Yeah. There's a rock bass, right? So we're talking about diversity here. That's another really cool species to target. You'll catch those you'll catch those alongside smallmouth and redbreast sunfish in a lot of our warm water rivers and streams. So they've got that. Sometimes they're nicknamed red eye. They've got that real
because of the redness
that
in the eye
red
right
margin,
there.
yeah. And they can get to be pretty nice size too. But you know what? People think fly fishing, they immediately think trout.
It's what always people think, but there's so much more than
There's so much more than that,
Yeah.
as you know, all the warm water opportunities, and then you start thinking about salt water, and it's like, you know,
Yeah,
it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Alex, it truly has been my pleasure to
Oh,
have
it's-
you. It's
yeah.
been an educational experience. I do want to have you back. We could talk about blue cats.
Oh, we could talk for hours on fish.
Yeah, for sure. And let me just pull this up here full screen for you. If you want to know more about wildlife management, conservation, boating, hunting, fishing, just go to DWR's website, dwrvirginia.gov. Again, dwr.virginia.gov. You can find a whole slew of things there as well. And of course, as we always mention, Alex, we want people to remember the regs, be smart, be safe, and remember conservation is really what it's about.
Yep, that's it. Getting out, enjoying yourself, enjoying the resource, and looking after it. So have an invested interest in the health of that resource so we can be doing this into the future. But yeah, that's it. And hey, thank you so much. It was a pleasure coming on today. It's great. I'm always happy to talk about fishing in Virginia. And yeah, we'll definitely talk about some other topics.
We'll do it again.
Yeah,
Alex,
that sounds
thank you
great.
so much for joining us.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Off the Hook with Matty D.